Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in day to talk about the second episode of the Ranger Reject anime. Of course, this is also known as Sentai, Daishikaku, or Go-Go Loser Ranger. Really, whatever name this series goes by in your heart. I am here to talk about the second episode today, titled Go Fighter D. Now, I don't know if you will remember that I've actually covered this series before on the channel. I mean, you can probably go to like my recent uploads and see that it has been a month or a little over a month at this point, about like probably getting close to like 50 or so days since I initially released the first video here on Go-Go Loser Ranger. And since then, I have had life come up, so I haven't been able to get back and record some of these episode reviews, but I really want to keep recording them, and that's what I'm here to do today. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about episode 2 of the anime, and this is a very, very interesting episode because I can definitely tell that, of course, the studio who's animating the series, Yostar Pictures, they are taking Negi Haruba's original work, of course, the author of the series, and turning it into something better than the original manga is. Of course, I'm a massive fan of the manga, and Yostar Pictures is really taking everything that's done in the manga, and they are really reordering all of the series, the entire series, in a much more interesting way than, of course, the manga was originally conceived as, right? We'll get into it, but this episode covers all of chapter 2, actually, a little bit of chapter 3, and then a small part of chapter 7, which is very, very interesting because the only other anime I can think of off the top of my head that covered material of chapter 7 in its like first 2 episodes is only like Oshi no Ko, because the first episode of that was a feature-length film, so it covered chapters 1 through 10. So yeah, the way they're doing this is very interesting. And I'm just going to talk about the chapter, the episode as it's gone through in the actual anime, and then at the end I'll talk about all of the changed scenes and all of the various different occurrences that are changed between the anime and the manga, because there are a surprisingly big amount of them here. But we'll get into all of that at the very end of the video. Of course, there will be timestamps down below, so I will let you know whenever, various things are happening that I'm talking about in the episode. So without further ado, I'd say that we just hop on right into it. Again, this says episode 2, titled Go Fighter D. So of course we ended off last episode with D. We learned that he has a human form, of course, this black-haired kid that we have saw at the beginning of the first episode. And pretty much we get an intro to this episode in a much more interesting way, as we see that Fighter D is actually doing the Ranger, the Ranger exam test or whatever it is, pretty much seeing that if he will be accepted to become a fledgling Ranger in the future. And we actually get the intro to this is honestly a interesting glyph segment of or a glyph intro segment of the series, pretty much going through the series like, 13 years ago the mysterious flying fortress appeared above the town, and in the flying fortress were these big monsters, but oh no, the divine dragon rangers are here and they will come to strike down all of the different foes. So pretty much that intro scene. The intro scene really reminds me a lot of like the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's whole design motif of how they tell the backstory in that series, of the whole glyphs with like Ganon and Hyrule and the 100-year-ago war, all of that very interesting stuff. And it seems to be that same exact design put here into this first part of the episode, right? So after we see that Fighter D is, of course, in his human form, taking this fitness exam part of the test, we see that as he's running around, he points out some of the Rangers that are giving them all instructions. He points out all of their hairstyles, and he sort of makes a little bit of fun of them. But there isn't really too much to it, as he just continues to run around, and he seems to stumble a little bit, but he gets back up, and there's not really a whole lot more to that, as we suddenly cut to the opening theme of Go-Go Loser Ranger, which is Jikai Yokoku by, of course, Tatsuya Kitani. This is a definitely very interesting opening. We heard it as the ending of last episode, and it seems like a very solid opening. It definitely has a sense of a beat to it, and I definitely feel like this is an opening that I am sort of decently strong in it right now, but I feel that it will definitely grow on me as time goes on. There's a lot of fun design motifs as we will get into, like, later characters we'll meet inside of this season, and, of course, the whole big thing of, like, Fighter D running away from a bunch of hands, trying to pull him back constantly and make him move like a puppeteer. Very, very interesting visuals here that definitely won't get old, and really, nothing is majorly spoiled in this intro sequence. I mean, there's only like one or two things, but they're all revealed in this episode. So the opening sequence works really well, and it's not something like a JoJo opening where it spoils half the series in the opening, right? Which is always sort of nice to see whenever a series doesn't do that, and they have just a good intro opening. So at this point, we get done off the opening theme, and we cut back into another scene with Fighter D. Of course, he's still in that human form, and we see that he's at the Divine Dragon Keeper's HQ, where he goes up to the front desk, and he's sort of asking the front desk staff about a few things, and he's mainly asking about the whereabouts of the Dragon Keepers, right? The front desk lady tells him that the Dragon Keepers aren't in the, in this base because they are at other different various places. And at this point, while he's coming up, the two characters that we sort of focused on and met last episode, of course, Hibiki Sakurama and Yumeko Suzukuri, we see that both of those guys come in, and they come and talk to Fighter D here, of course, in the human form, and pretty much they just talk about, like, oh, hey, so I see you actually enlisted in the Ranger forces, thank you so very much, and we're glad to see new blood coming in and all of that sort of thing. And we sort of get the idea here that Sakurama is a very big guy on, like, physical contact. He's got a big, boisterous personality. So what he does is he grabs D and actually starts to rub up against his face. And at this point, we learn something about the transformations of the various fighters, that they are very weak and brittle. We'll see that again later in this episode, as we see a small crack form on D's face, as he gets very, very scared. And it seems like Suzukuri may have actually seen something along with this, but she gets a very freaked out look, and D also has a very freaked out lunch of this, as both Hibiki and Yumeko both invite out Fighter D to lunch, right? At this time, we cut over to another scene that happens in the flying fortress of the all of the various fighters, as we see that fighters A and C are playing a game of tic-tac-toe, in where Fighter A is completely decimating Fighter C in this tic-tac-toe game. It really looks like Fighter C does not know how to play at all, or it's a very new game to them or something, because yeah, Fighter C isn't very good at this. He has left the board wide open for Fighter A to get a, of course, Fighter A is playing with X's or crosses, and Fighter C is playing with circles. So, yeah, Fighter A just marks it into ground, and he completely wins over Fighter C here. And at this point, we see that a chopper lands outside of the Flying Fortress, as we see that the Red and Blue Rangers both come into the Flying Fortress to come have a word with all the various fighters, right? Pretty much the whole gist here is that D has, of course, betrayed the agreement that the Ranger Force and the fighters had with each other. Pretty much, hey, you guys will be pawns to us, and we will have a working relationship to where you will concede every week in the Sunday showdowns, right? And of course, D stood up last time, and these two Rangers aren't very happy about that. And as I sort of wrote it down, the Blue and Red Rangers play a sort of game of good cop, strict cop, as we see that the Blue Ranger is getting all up into faces of all the various fighters, like, hey, you guys are supposed to be order, right? Where is D? And all the fighters like, hey, D isn't here right now, we don't know where he is. And pretty much the Blue Ranger just gets on all of these other fighters' cases about, well, you guys need to take all this responsibility, like, what's going on here? And eventually Red eventually says, like, hey, here's the thing, it's not their fault, their fighter also betrayed them also, so it's not completely on them, as they eventually say, but because of all of this that's happened here, you guys have some new monitors in the Flying Fortress, as we get introduced to two new characters, Ran Hikaru and Shinta Ruri, and we also learn of the sort of ranking system of the Ranger forces here. We will learn more about this in later episodes, but here's just a brief introduction to it. We learned that Hikaru is a junior 3rd rank, and Ruri is a senior 3rd rank, right? Like I said, we'll get into what all of those mean later, but they're not very important right this second. So pretty much we see that these two blue rangers are in the blue garrison. They're going to be stationed on the flying fortress and will have a lot of various things to do in monitoring all of the fighters to make sure no rebellion like this happens again, right? Fighter C is very, very upset with this, and he just sort of like, no, we don't want this, and eventually the Red Ranger sort of cuts him off, and pretty much it's like, hey, here's the thing. Conflict occurs when a party doesn't understand its own place, right? And he says, and you guys are a party in this sense, and you guys don't understand where you currently sit, right? And as all of this happens, he sort of goes up, and he punches one of the big pillars holding up the flying fortress, and he just blasts the shreds, sort of just showing his anger. As we sort of get into the mind of another fighter, Fighter F, who we saw last episode, and we see that he is pretty much in submission by all of these people, but we see that there may be a few seeds of doubt getting strewn in his mind by Fighter C, and we see that he is probably one of the better friends with Fighter D, and he pretty much thinks about where his friend D is, and how maybe he has a point in all of this needless plundering that he's doing, and all of this non-rule following, right? And as this happens, we cut the scene back down again to the lunch where, of course, Fighter D is eating with Suzuki and Sakurama. And we see that they're eating there. We see that D doesn't really actually know how to eat human food, because what he pretty much does is he stabs the knife into a piece of the meat. He stabs the fork into the other one, and he's sort of just holding them in his fist, like not even holding a fork like you would hold a fork or a pencil. He's just sort of like got it sitting in his fist, like how you sort of hold like a cup or something, and he's just like ripping it off from there. He doesn't really know how to eat, of course, because he's a fighter, and he even mentions a lot later that food like this is a delicacy for all the fighters up there, because they don't get to eat like this, right? Pretty much we sit down and we get a little bit of an info dump about the various Ranger forces, because of course that's what D was asking the Ranger HQ about earlier, and Suzuki pretty much explains that there are 6 different garrisons in the Ranger force, and they are spread out among very different spots in Amenagawa City, which is the city where this story takes place, and that all of these selective keepers, all of the dragon keepers, normally stay to their own defined colored base. Pretty much then Sakurama also says that the Ranger force is also a force that isn't only just combat based and defeating all the fighters. They are a big humanitarian agency in the area. They help with environmental cleanup. They help cops with investigations of some kinds, right? And we see that the Ranger Force is mainly multifaceted, and they're not just after the single idea of, Jay, we're going to go and we're going to beat up all of these monsters, right? They sort of have a good place in the society of the world, but of course, this isn't correct in the society of D, as he's sort of thinking about this, and he eventually blurts out something like, oh, well, I wonder what they would think if they knew the entire thing was a sham. And both Suzukuri and Sakurama seem a little bit like, huh, what are you talking about? But all of a sudden, Suzuki speaks up, and she says something like, oh, yeah, I mean, we all saw that video about how the Ranger Force is all just a ploy for the fighters and all of that, but who would believe that stupid video? And, of course, Sakurama backs her up, and Fighter D's like, oh, yeah, this specific video there, like, oh, look at that, right? And at that point, we see that a little child comes up to Sakurama. This is a child that we actually saw in the last episode, and Sakurama actually saved this kid from a little bit of danger. So the kid's just like, oh, hey, thank you, can I get a picture with you? Yada, yada, yada. We see a few other things where, like, the chef comps the Dragon Rangers meals just because, hey, they're good people. And all of these other various things pretty much showing you, like, hey, all of these are tokens of appreciation given to the Honorable Ranger Force, as Sakurama calls it, right? At this point, both Suzuki and Sakurama get out of their way, and they need to go to their afternoon duties, as Yumiko says that she actually needs to go to the Red Garrison for a specific reason, right? And we all see that Hibiki also has some other just various things to go do. After the point that they leave, D is left sitting at this table, and D eventually just says, like, goes up to Chan, is like, hey, can I see the picture that you took with those 2 Rangers earlier? And the kid shows him on his phone, as we see that D takes a look into Hibiki's eyes in the photo and transforms into a perfect copy of Hibiki Sakurama. It's a very cool scene, sort of just seeing D just suddenly transform, and I feel like this may be a little bit of a spoiler, but it's not that big of a spoiler. This is a form that Dee will take mostly throughout this series, so it is pretty fun to just go and see the origin of this in the anime, right? Like I said, I am caught up on the manga. I don't think I said it in this episode specifically, but I am caught up on the manga, so it is just a little bit of a cool thing to see. At this point, we cut to the Red Garrison, where we see that Yumeko is walking through the halls, and behind him is, of course, Hibiki. But of course, this isn't the Hibiki that we've seen before, the real Hibiki. This is the Fighter D who is mimicking Hibiki currently, right? From here, I called him Hibiki D, or Hibi D on my paper, just sort of separate them, but you should know that Fighter D is in Hibiki's form for pretty much the rest of this episode, so unless it changes, I'm just going to keep calling him Fighter D just because that is so much easier just to get across, right? Yumeko has to deliver a letter to the Red Divine Dragon Keeper, so she's walking down the halls. Hibiki's sort of talking with her, and everybody can sort of see that Hibiki is a bit different than he normally is. He's not as boisterous, he's sort of more reserved and all that sort of thing. We see that Yumeko has to do a bunch of interesting stuff to, like, scan into the Red Garrison and get in, right? And pretty much, while this is happening, Dee is thinking about, okay, I'm in the Red Garrison, and I want to kill the Red Keeper because he's done so many atrocities to me and all the other fighters. But then he has the realization that he actually doesn't know what the Red Keeper actually looks like, because, of course, the Red Keeper is always wearing the Dragon Ranger mask. So whenever he's wearing a mask, you can't see his real face. So pretty much they walk into the big chamber of all of the various Red Rangers, and he's like, all right, any of these people could beat a Red Ranger, but just which one is it? As he's sort of looking around, and eventually he just asks, like, oh, is the Red Ranger here? I've got to deliver this letter to him. And as all this is going on, there's another guy in here who claims to be the Red Keeper, but quickly Suzukuri pretty much, like, cuts him down, saying, like, oh no, you're not the Red Keeper, as we get introduced to Senior 3rd Rank Shun Tokita. And we see that Tokita's whole thing here is that he is very big on, like, okay, I will be the next Dragon Keeper, like, I'm suited for this perfectly, like, there's not really any big deal to it whatsoever, right? And it's a little thing that's noted here that Tokita and the real Sakurama have a little bit of a past, and Tokita can obviously tell that Sakurama is acting a little bit weird because, of course, this is Dee mimicking Sakurama, so makes perfect and clear sense, right? So at this point, we see that Tokita is really like, all right, who is this guy here? This isn't the real Hibiki, and he sort of walks up to him and he grabs Dee's arm, and of course it starts to shatter because this is the very fragile body of the fighters that we saw before. So as his arm starts cracking, Tokita's like, hey, you're acting really weird, what's going on here? As eventually Dee's just like, okay, well, if you're close enough to the Red Keeper, I'm just going to give you the letter here. So he hands over the letter that Suzuki gave him earlier. Something I did forget to mention earlier is that he had a pouch that had the knife that he was using to eat earlier in it, and he was planning to pull that to kill this supposed Red Keeper in quotation marks that is Tokita here, and that's why Tokita ended up grabbing his arm, right? At this point, Tokita's like, all right, thanks for the letter. I'll make sure to give it to Dee personally, or give it to the Red Keeper personally, as he says something to Suzuki, just saying like, hey, I know you like your yellow R&D squad there, but hey, we in the red are made for extermination of the fighters. You should join us instead, right? And Suzukuri just says like, hey, I value my free time more. So it's just a little bit of an interesting lore there, right? Yellow is the R&D squad of the Rangers, and red is the big extermination squad, right? There are 3 other colors in this squad. I wonder what they deal in, right? Just a little bit of just laying the tracks there, right? At this point, both Yumeko and Fighter D end up leaving the garrison as they are walking through the hallway to get to the outside. And as they're walking, D is sort of in his own head, just like, all right, well, if that's the Red Keeper, I remember seeing a bunch of those people's faces before. Like, I've seen them all on the battlefield. They've killed hundreds of my comrades. I want to kill all of them, but I mainly want to kill the Red Ranger. But who is the Red Ranger? And as he's walking down the hallway, we see a poster on the wall, and this poster also catches Dee's eye. And on the poster, we see that's pretty much just a recruitment flyer for the Ranger Force. And Dee looks at it, and he's just like, oh. And on the poster, we see the real Red Keeper, Sosei Akabane, the Red Keeper, in the flesh, and Dee gets a good look at his face. And as he's sitting there looking at this, the elevator opens, because another person is, of course, entering the red base. And who else would it be than the man himself, the Red Keeper, Sosei Akabane. And as Dee sees this, he turns around and he says, Oh, are you the Red Keeper? And the Red Keeper turns around, of course, Sosei turns around, he's like, oh, hey, good luck out there, right? We always love recruits like you. And Hibiki's like, oh my gosh, it's Red Keeper. And Suzukuri tries to pull him away, get him in the elevator, but he eventually hops out and he's like, do I want to kill him now? Do I want to kill him now? But eventually he just says, all right, let me think about this logically. As he just says to the Red Keeper, like, hey, congratulations on winning this past Sunday showdown. It looked really tough. Good thing pulling through. And he says something like, hey, those fighters are always very tricky, so make sure to stay on your toes and please be careful. As Sosei pretty much says, like, oh, hey, thank you, Various Ranger. I hope to see you on the battlefield soon, right? Pretty much giving off his condolences. As we end off the scene in the Red Garrison there. At this point, we cut out to outside of the Red Garrison, where Suzuki and Dee are both talking with each other. And Suzuki just blatantly asks Fighter D for the knife that he has been concealing. And Dee, not thinking, is just like, oh yeah, here you go. And he's like, yeah, I wasn't able to use it in there. I mean, I probably should have. But eventually she's like, wait a second, knife? How did she know I had a knife? And as he hands it off, suddenly his head flies off his body, as we see that Suzukuri has taken a knife and chopped off his own head with it, realizing that he is a fighter, right? And Dee suddenly gets freaked out by this, and he's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And Suzuki actually says that she has been covering for Fighter D all day because she has clearly known that something has been going on with him, and that is something that, of course, isn't normal. So she has been covering all of the small and various mistakes that Fighter D has been making this entire time. Like that video thing, that was just one of them, right? And all of these various just little ploys. It's very interesting to see, right? At this point, Fighter D is just like, oh my gosh, who actually are you if you were able to figure out all of this? And Suzukuri just plainly says, like, hey, Fighter D, I am your enemy. It's a pretty interesting moment. I remember in the manga this being like a page that was very much focused on for like the shock value of it. But eventually D's just like, oh no, I've got to get out of here. And he just tries to keep running away, but every time he runs away, Suzukuri is just right in front of him and keeps chopping off his head one by one. A really funny scene here. D just cannot get away from her. As eventually D ends up on the ground, he's like, all right, hey, how about this? How about we sit down here and let's actually talk it out, right? As Suzuki's like, all right, sounds good then. I actually have a favor to ask of you. And Fighter D's is like, what favor is that? And Suzuki says that she wants to work together with Fighter D to destroy the Ranger Force, and they will do it together. And Fighter D's like, what in the world's going on here? As all of a sudden, around the corner comes the real Sakurama. At this point, D has had just enough time to phase out into the human boy body that we've seen him in plenty of times before. And pretty much the real Hibiki's here now, and he's just like, hey, Suzukuri, good thing I found you. We need to start evacuating the entire perimeter around us because a random monster has appeared in the area, right? And as all of this is happening, we see Suzukuri like, all right, sounds good. As she turns around, she's like, hey, you go somewhere safe, or I'm going to keep my eye on you or something. But she can't say any of this because Fighter D has actually ran off already. So as we now cut to another new scene, as we see that this fighter who has gotten the loose is actually Fighter F. Of course, this is a fighter that we have saw before earlier, and it seems like these seeds of doubts finally got to Fighter F, and Fighter F has finally thought about these. And we see that he is standing up against a bunch of the Red Garrison members, as we specifically see Tokita in front of him, who is getting ready to cut him down. And pretty much as all of this happens, Sosei actually appears out of thin air pretty much, and all of the other various Red Rangers sort of get out of the way, as we see that the Red Keeper is here to deal with this monster. And as Sosei, of course, appears, he calls out to his divine artifact, saying like, hey, Sosei, Akabane, transform into the Red Keeper. As we get a little bit of a transformation sequence, it's not really anything special at all. It's just simple like, oh, go around here, and oh, look at that. Sosei is now in the Red Ranger costume. We see that D is off in a distance, and D is actually watching this happen, so he's like, oh, he really is the Red Ranger, right? As we now see that the Red Keeper pulls out his divine artifact, and he pretty much says like, hey, you have caused so much pain to others, Fighter F, and you've experienced plenty of pain yourself, and you have died so many times, but today you will die for your final time. As I forget where it was explained, it may have been explained somewhere in this episode, but divine artifacts are the tools that the Dragon Keepers use, and these are the only things that can truly kill the monsters, or the fighters. Because of course we've seen in the past that, of course, D got his head chopped off like 5 times, but they can regenerate, but the divine artifacts make it so that these guys cannot actually regenerate, so if they get hit with this, they are indeed dead. As all of a sudden, we sort of get the start of the little bit of a fight. I call it a fight, even though it's just strictly one-sided between the Red Keeper and Fighter F. As the Red Keeper invokes his divine artifact called the Red Dragon Salamandra, as he sort of stabs it into the ground. His divine artifact sort of looks like a sword in a way, but with some special things coming off of it. And the sword is completely white, with almost some interesting streaks on it that almost look like some muscle fibers or something. It is a very interesting design in the long run. And he calls out this move, stabs the sword into the ground, and a bunch of salamander-like snake things made out of fire all pop out of the ground and all go towards Fighter D. Not Fighter D, Fighter F. And Fighter F in his mind just thinks a little bit about how interesting it is, and he's like, hey, even if we made a deal with the Dragon Keeper so long ago, rebellion will still occur. It's a force of nature that will always happen. And he just says, hey, try your worst, Dragon Keepers. But right now, I feel the most alive I've ever had. I've been cooped up for so many years, but today I truly feel alive. And he's like, hey, this is all thanks to you, D. As we see that the Red Keeper calls out the big name of this attack, Yamada no Orochi, as all of these flaming salamandra sort of go in and completely consume on Fighter F, as we see his dead hand rise up into the sky. And once again, Fighter F just says like, hey, I'm sorry, D, I ended up losing this battle, but today I feel more alive than I ever have before. And it's sort of a little bit of a sour note to end the episode off on, but it is sort of a nice moment seeing F's whole rebellion and seeing how it is truly played out here. As we now move on to the ending theme of the episode, titled Sekai wa Iranai by Akari Nanao. This is a very interesting ending to me because this is like a choreographed dance number ending with a bunch of cool moving parts, and we constantly switch between a few fighters dancing, of course, with D in the center of it, and then the 5 Dragon Keepers also dancing around. So it is pretty fun to see all of these various characters dancing, and it is another catchy song. Both the ending and the opening themes are both very catchy songs that I can definitely see in time really making the series a little bit of a success for this weird, fun, stylistic music. Sort of what happened with Mashal Season 2, if I think the opening was called Bing Bang Brawn or whatever, or Bing Bing Brawn, or I don't remember. Bring Bell? Oh gosh, I didn't actually watch Mashal Season 2 yet, so I don't quite know, but I know a lot of people really enjoyed that opening just because of its funny groove, and it was also more of that sort of like weird dance session thing that Yostar Pictures has put into this ending. But I did enjoy the ending theme, as we pretty much end off the episode with that little puppet scene of all the characters going around, and here we just see that the 2 puppets talking here are D, or Fighter D, and Sakurama, and their various puppets are just talking. And we do get the ending of the episode title here, but I forgot to write it down. I'm logging into my computer right now just to get what next episode will be called, episode 3. Just please bear with me for a second here, if I can type in the right pin to my computer. And here we are. The episode is titled Our Evil Will Bloom Sunday. So that's going to be the next episode right there. Let me actually write that down for my notes. But like I said earlier, the really interesting thing about this episode is how they changed it up and moved around all of the various chapters and things to make a more interesting, coherent story than maybe the original manga is, right? Like I said, it will take time to actually see if that is what occurs, but, yeah, because once we get to first season over, we'll be able to tell, okay, was the manga better or was the anime better, which, leads into more draws, more suspense, more interesting things, but, pretty much just going through it. The Glyph intro segment in the end is a completely anime original thing, but it is just like a little bit of a recap. And then everything in the episode really tracks on until Hibiki and Yumeko, the real versions, ask Fighter D out for lunch. Because from there, we go from when they ask him out to lunch to them actually eating lunch and continuing in that scene all the way through to where they meet the Red Ranger, and pretty much all the way till the scene where the real Hibiki comes in and says, like, hey, what's going on here? And it's like, hey, fighters are appearing, right? Something's going on over here. Pretty much all of that is Chapter 2. So like I said, we cover all of Chapter 2 in between that initial part, and we skip out the part in the Flying Fortress because I'll get to that in a quick second. But pretty much we cover Chapter 2 in its entirety all the way down to that point. And then Chapter 3 is a very weird segment because how it actually works in Chapter 3, we may see some of this next episode, but Suzukuri and Fighter D are actually talking in a specific room, like eating some more food or something, talking about their own personal goals. And pretty much the way it works out is that they're finally going out to go do something to go potentially cause some damage to one of the Dragon Keepers whenever Hibiki comes and finds the two of them, and they're just out on the end of the street, not actually in that same alleyway. So a bit of a different thing there, but pretty much the scene from there goes on where F ends up dying to the Yamada no Orochi move that the Red Keeper does. But then the really interesting part of this is that not only do we cut out a good portion of Chapter 3 and the last half of Chapter 3, which of course we'll get next episode, but the part in the Flying Fortress, that is actually from Chapter 7 of the series. Because at this point, Fighter F has, Fighter D has rebelled, and also Fighter F has, or no, did I say F? I don't know. Whatever I'm thinking. Fighter F has also rebelled and been killed by the Dragon Rangers, and something else will happen in the upcoming chapters that will also spur a little bit of a massive thing to where the Dragon Rangers want to keep an eye on the all the fighters because of, like I said, something that will happen later on in the next 2 episodes of this series. So that is why they actually go up there to install Hikaru and Ruri up in the Blue Garrison, or in the Flying Fortress. And whenever they do go up there, both the Red and Blue Keepers also go up there, but Hikaru and Ruri actually are the ones that like cause the damage, who actually like punch Fighter C and like cut his head off and make him regenerate, and who destroy that pillar. So pretty much Red and Blue's, the 2 Dragon Keepers, their involvement in that scene is much more played up here than it was in the actual manga, being that at that point in the manga, something happens and the Red Keeper's not at his full strength. I don't think that's too much of a spoiler to say. But yeah, it is very interesting to see how they reworked all of this, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they do this going forward, because Episode 1 had a few deviations from the main plot, but it was just like a cutscene here and a small other cutscene there. Nothing really major at all. So it is very interesting to see how they reorder this. But like I said, we covered all of Chapter 2, like the middle 10 pages of Chapter 3 almost, and then of course like 5 or like 7 pages into Chapter 7. So all of it is very, very interesting to see. But like I said, we'll just have to see how Yostar Pictures adapts Haruba's story as all of this goes forward. And yeah, with that, thank you guys very much for watching. That's all I really got to say about this second episode of Sentai Daishikaku. Definitely a very good episode. A lot of intrigue is being built, and at this point, I hope a lot of fans are getting into the series because definitely a lot of intrigue is definitely built here. Yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching. If you want to keep up with this series, hopefully you won't mind hitting the subscribe button on the channel. That's one of the best ways that you can get served these videos is by going to your subscription feed. Also turn on that bell down below so you get notified whenever I put up one of these new uploads. I'm going to try to aim them to get them out every Monday or so, or at least before the Monday after the episode's release, because they release on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to try to get the episodes out then, but no complete promises. I'll have the playlist down below with all the other episode reviews in it, so please go down there and check that out. And in the comment section down below, leave me a comment just saying what you thought about this episode. What do you think about the whole way they are reusing all of the scenes here and reordering them? I find it very interesting, and I'd be really interested to know what you guys think about it. So yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time for the third episode of Ranger Reject, titled, of course, Our Evil Will Bloom Sunday. Again, thank you guys so very much for watching, and this has been Glowplasma231 covering the second episode of Ranger Reject, signing out.